this is Jason Mitchell. I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of the Iverson call. As you can see in the shot here, we have a number of calls. All look a little different. It's kind of always a challenge because if you look at some of the barrels, they look similar, you know, or especially between this barrel and this barrel. When people call me and say, hey man, I'm looking for a particular kind of reed, you kind of have to do a little deductive reasoning. But I want to talk a little bit about the history. If you look at this first one, it is a old style standard call. And you'll notice that the tone board is flat and the reed is curved. If you're an Iverson person, that would be completely familiar, something you're very recognizable. Referred to as a real foot lake style design. And those are the calls that Evie Iverson made for much of his career, if not all of his career. He had some deal with bowls where he was making some straight reed calls or selling his straight reed calls, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially all he made was a bent reed call. When my dad bought the business in '76, he made this call for a long period of time. He introduced a version of this old style call with a shorter barrel, with a thinner reed, and called that the old style timber, a little easier to blow call. And then he moved sometime, I have to check the dates, probably early 80s, and he began messing with the length of the reed and the width of the reed. So you'll notice here, and he also messed with the output as well, how the holes were drilled. But if you'll notice between these calls, much wider, much shorter, much wider, much shorter. And so these are the new style call, old style call, new style super standard, new style super timber. So, you know, this one has a long barrel to go with that one and a short barrel to go with this one. And you'll notice straight tone board, bent reed, straight tone board, bent reed, holds the design in the tradition of the Iverson design. But these calls, the new style calls, were easier to blow, had a higher register on the top end. They rang, they went up and down the scale. They were very much easier for newer callers to learn on. Now, the old style calls, we have a loyal fan base to, much raspier, a little harder to blow, and some people refuse to use anything else. But in my opinion, my dad took the original Iverson design and improved it with the new style design. So, sometime in the mid to late 80s, a guy by the name of Wayne Betts started knocking on my dad's door and said, hey, I want to do some competition calling, will you make me a call? So originally my dad built him a version of the super standard wide reed with a shorter barrel on it, and he began competing with a version of this, which is a bent reed call with this, and it was super loud, super raspy. But at some point, to keep up with the demands of competition calling, my dad designed a straight reed call, and just simply for competing with. And what's crazy about this little adventure today is you'll notice that what evolved was a call that we now call the World Champion Field Call, and it's got a bent tone board and straight reed. Now you'll notice that has a number 53 on it. My dad used to make all these calls and put numbers on them, and then those of us who were competing, Wayne, and along came John Tanishin and his brother, and of course David Jayne, who ended up winning the World Championship in 1987 using this call actually. So he put these numbers on to kind of keep track of which was which and who liked what and who was using what. But what's interesting is this version of the World Champion, what we now call the World Champion Field Call. You see that call there? It actually has a shorter reed on it. And so these early versions of the World Champion Field Call are hard to find. I only got a couple of these, but these are some of the original calls that people were using. Now, funny thing is, when I was looking through this stuff today, I found a little secret that my dad hides. He had a little piece of paper stuck in this stopper, this is the more modern version. And if you can talk about traces of history here, I opened it up and read this for the first time in a long time today. But it says on this piece of paper, in my dad's writing, I don't know if you can read it, it doesn't really matter. I'll take a picture of it and put it to this later. One of the original 10 calls sent with the 5 Iverson team callers in the 1987 World Championship in Stuttgart. Each caller had 2 calls. One would serve as a backup in case of emergency. Emery Mitchell 1194. So what's great about that piece of paper is this was one of the calls, and actually so was this one here that I have on my thing. This was a backup call for me. My original got stolen. But what evolved was a world champion field call, and it's super popular. And to my understanding, this is the last call to win the world champion, the last wood call to win the world champion contest in Stuttgart, unless my data tells me otherwise, in 1987. And David Jayne was blowing that call. And like my dad wrote, there were 5 of us. There was John Tanishin and his younger brother who blew in the juniors. And forgive me, John Tanishin's younger brother, I can't remember your first name. So there's 2. Me, David Jayne, and Wayne Betts. All of us called. I think Wayne made it to the second round. I didn't make it out of the first. I don't know how John did. And, of course, David won. But there were 5 Iversons blown in that contest in 1987. But what came out of that is my dad's call that he developed to bring to market called the World Champion Field Call, and it's super popular today. But that's the difference. Evolved from a bent reed to a modified bent reed to what we now use on a day-to-day basis. Hope that video was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.